today we are talking about some Stephen King with the short story collection Skeleton Crew. But before we get to that, I gotta tell you a couple other things, as I always do. Sorry if you've been following the Stephen King videos and you're getting tired of this, but I just want to give a little bit of background. My best bud from high school, Jordan, we got together, started reading all the Stephen King books because a lot of them are interconnected in something called the multiverse. And so we were reading through them and finding all these connections, and we did a bunch of videos about them. Unfortunately, I feel weird like always bringing this up, but again, I just want to give background. Jordan passed away a couple years ago now. And since then, I don't want the Stephen King Read-a-thon to just like fizzle. There's a million Stephen King videos on the interwebs, so you know any book you wanna see a review on, you can find it pretty easily. And that's still true about the short story collections, but the short story collections do seem to be a little bit less popular, especially the reviews. They don't really go into detail. I am a huge fan of short stories, and so I thought, yeah, I'm gonna continue reading all the Stephen King books. I'm not going to do a video about all the novels, but I am going to do a video about each short story collection, and I'm going to talk about each one of those short stories just briefly, give a quick little synopsis and what I thought about it. And that's about it. Oh, but before I jump into that, let me just say, I am open to doing videos about any of the novels, but I don't want to do them alone. I found that I find it much more enjoyable if I talk about a book with another person. So if there's anybody out there who has read a Stephen King book that you liked and you want to talk about it and like do a Zoom call and discuss it and do like a little book discussion type thing, we'll record it and we can put it on YouTube. That'd be really fun. So just like Jordan and I used to do, we can talk about the book and then put that up on the channel. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump into Skeleton Crew. Ooh. The first story is The Mist, and forgive me, I'm going to be reading some of my notes here. The Mist is a pretty popular story. It's actually a novella, not a short story. It's the longest story in this book. A mysterious, impenetrable fog descends on a small town, causing a bunch of regular small town people to be trapped in the local grocery store. They are trapped because there are horrific monsters outside who kill anyone who ventures outside. Anyone who ventures outside. The story basically covers how different people deal with this incredibly stressful situation. Some handle it well, and some, well, let's just say not all the monsters are outside in the mist. This story is pretty good stuff. Overall, I think I didn't ruin it for myself, but I did sort of lessen the experience by watching the movie first. I've said many times on this channel that I've never seen any Stephen King movies. Well, actually, last year I was in a hotel flipping through the channels, and The Mist happened to be on. So I didn't see the entire thing. I saw like 2/3 of it because it was already playing. But I got, the main gist of it. And actually, I'm gonna maybe be unpopular here. I think the movie's better. I think the movie, it's basically beat for beat the exact same story, but the characters are better fleshed out. Some of the mystery is like more developed. I just liked it more. And the ending is killer. Very famously, it's got a crazy ending that differs a lot from the book. And I'm not going to say anything else about it, but I think the movie ending is way better. But, that being said, the story is worth reading. It's pretty good. I do have a couple gripes about it, but I don't want to give the impression that I didn't like it. It is good and worth a read. Next up is Here There Be Tygers. A little boy is in school and he really needs to go pee. His teacher is very stern and mean to him. When he reaches the restroom, he discovers there's a tiger inside, but he really, really needs to go. What's a boy to do? This story feels like an odd mix of like enjoyable, but also pointless. You ever read a story and you're like, why was this even written? Like, there's nothing really bad about it, but it just feels like, why is this a thing? Like, the kid goes in the bathroom and there's a tiger. And then like, well, I don't want to spoil it. But it's just like, why? This is just, I guess it's just absurdist, maybe is the term for it. Like, who thinks of that? I don't know. There's a tiger. And it's never explained. That's the thing. I think if there was some sort of explanation, oh, the tiger escaped from the zoo. But there's nothing like that. It's never explained. So just roll with it. Have fun. I mean, it's not bad. Have fun with it. Also, there's a weird thing in here where, like, the kid calls the bathroom the basement, and his teacher is like, it's a restroom, not a basement. And, like, did bathrooms used to be called basements? Is that like a New England thing? I've never heard of a bathroom being called a basement. In my world, a basement is like the lower level of a house that is underground. I've never heard of somebody referring to the bathroom as a basement. Anybody out there help me out with that? I don't know. Next story is The Monkey, which is depicted on the cover of the book. And they just made a movie out of this not too long ago. Hal works for Texas Instruments in Arnett, Texas. And I believe that's where Stu Redman lived and worked at the beginning of The Stand. So we see a cool connection to The Stand here. It's about a creepy toy monkey. Each time it bangs its cymbals together, someone dies. Or maybe it's just a coincidence. So I've read a handful of these stories where like the doll or the toy or whatever comes to life and it's evil. And I think it's been better done elsewhere. This one is okay. But again, it's just like, it doesn't have that X factor that's making it click for me. It is suspenseful, and I will say at the very end, there's this scene where they're like out on a boat and there's a storm coming and they're trying to get to shore before the boat sinks. That part was really intense, and I did find myself very concerned for the characters involved. And so I guess that's a sign of a good story. I was like, oh crap, are they going to make it or not? So, in that light, I suppose it is a pretty good story. Cain Rose Up. A college student named Kurt Garish finishes taking his final exam of the semester. He then goes back to his dorm room and does something truly terrible. I won't say more. I thought this was a pretty solid story and very short as well. That's all the notes I have. Yeah, he does something atrocious. But it's actually a pretty good story if you like messed up stuff. There you go. Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. Takes place in Castle Rock, so that's cool. It connects it to Cujo, and The Stand mentions Castle Rock, so it's all part of the multiverse there. This story specifically mentions Joe Camber, and that's Cujo. Mentions Old Derry Road. Derry is the town where the book It takes place, which is my next book to read in the Stephen King Read-a-thon. I haven't read it yet, but I know it takes place in Derry. Also, Derry was mentioned in the book The Running Man. That was its first mention, I believe. There are theories online that connect this story to the Talisman and the Dark Tower, but I don't really see that. I don't know. Unless there's an explicit mention, there might be things that are connected that I don't notice or I don't know about. Unless it's specifically said, it mentions the name Joe Camber. Okay, I know that's connected to Cujo, that kind of thing. But yeah, maybe this is tied to the Talisman. Maybe it's tied to the Dark Tower. So far, I cannot confirm that. There are a couple issues with that theory, and I usually like to err on the side of caution. Now, this story doesn't really get interesting till about halfway through. Online, because I had questions, I went searching online, and people find this story to be great. Apparently, it's really popular. A lot of people really love this story. But personally, I found it hard to get into. I didn't feel like it got interesting till about halfway. And it's not like a really short story. It's like, I think it was like 30 or 40 pages, so it felt like it dragged at first. The first half is meandering and feels kind of pointless. It's especially confusing because it's told by a narrator recounting a conversation that he had with an old man, who in turn is telling a story about something that happened years before that. On top of that, he speaks in like this country bumpkin style dialect, and it just felt distracting. So it's just like trying to piece together what is going on here. There's multiple layers of time, and the dialect is weird. Overall, it kind of felt like listening to a story told by an easily distracted person who keeps getting off topic and mentioning irrelevant details. So apparently, according to my wife, it's like listening to me tell a story. The story itself is pretty neat, though, once you finally get to it. So there's this lady, Ophelia Todd. She loves to drive and is obsessed with finding the shortest routes possible. She's always exploring new roads to see if she can shave a few miles off of her path. Then the old man narrator takes a drive with her. Some strange things happen along the way, and I particularly like the ending. It was sweet and heartwarming. So I won't really say more, but yeah, like some bizarre stuff happens on the drive, and so that's why some people say it's connected to the Talisman, because maybe they like flipped into another dimension. But again, it didn't feel that way to me. Okay, I gotta go a little faster. I'm taking too long on these stories. The Jaunt. I really like this one. A family is getting ready to travel to Mars by way of the Jaunt, which is basically a form of teleportation. The two kids have never jaunted before, and they're nervous. So the dad, who is an experienced jaunter, tells them the story of how the scientist Victor Carroon first discovered how to jaunt about 300 years earlier. The Jaunt is a surprisingly cool science fiction story. Stephen King occasionally kind of branches out into sci-fi, and this one's pretty good. And it's got a nice little horror twist at the end, though. As the dad is telling the story of this guy, Carroon, Carroon is experimenting with mice, and as he's telling the story, there's like this mounting tension, and you keep wondering, like, what's happening to these mice? And the daughter starts asking you, wait, what happened to the mouse? What happened to the mice? What happens to the mouse? And you start to think, like, oh, what's happening? And then finally at the end, you're like, oh, that's crazy. So there's this growing sense of unease that is really satisfactory at the end. The Wedding Gig. In 1927, a jazz band gets hired by a Chicago bootlegger crime boss to play at his sister's wedding. At the gig, things initially go well, but then take a turn for the worse. Initially, I didn't really like this story all that much. I thought it was kind of weird how King, and I've heard other people complain about this as well, Stephen King kept going on and on about how fat the bride is. Like, he was obsessed with talking about how enormous this whale of a woman, this tub of lard, this hideously obese fatso. Like, okay, she's overweight. She's pretty, like, apparently she's pretty big. But, like, I don't know. It's just funny. But, you know, other than that, it's not a bad story. It's fine. I'm not one of these people that's like, oh, don't fat shame or whatever. Like, it's fine. But he does kind of go over the top, I think. But then I actually really enjoyed the end. At the very end, there's this little synopsis that tells the story of, like, what happened to some of the characters after this story ended. And honestly, I wish that were the main story. I would have loved to just read that story instead of this story of, like, the band playing at the wedding. Paranoid, a Chant. This is a 3-page poem about a guy who thinks everyone is out to get him. I guess. I don't really get poetry. I'm not intellectual like that. The poetry I like is like Shel Silverstein. So the deeper meanings and metaphors are pretty much lost on me. Yeah, that's it. The Raft. I loved this story. And I've said this before, in my daily life, I try to just be a normal guy. I'm not into like sick and twisted violence or sex or anything like that. This story has some crazy stuff, and it's got some gruesome things, and it's got some like vulgar, inappropriate stuff. Like, I wouldn't recommend this for kids. It's got some sex and stuff, but like, dang, it's a good story. It is captivating. It is frightening. It is hair-raising and thrilling, and you're gonna just be on the edge of your seat wondering what's gonna happen. Who's gonna die? Who's gonna survive? All that stuff. 4 college students decide to visit a lake in October for one last hurrah and say goodbye for the summer. Say goodbye to summer. There's a raft anchored about 50 feet or 50 yards, I don't remember, from the shore, and they swim out to it, but there's something sinister in the water, and it doesn't want them to leave. Now, real quick, there is a cool connection to Christine. The 4 main characters, are students at Horlicks University, which ties it to Christine and also the short story The Crate, which I talked about in my last video. I wrote, I love this. This is horror, period. Okay. It's got some gross out elements and some sexual content, but I was like totally captivated by this. I like the mystery of the monster, like what is it even? I like the power dynamics between the characters. King really captured what it feels like to be insecure and maybe a little jealous of your friend who's more popular than you. This is a perfect place to talk about this because Jordan, when we were kids, he was, you could see in the old videos, he's a handsome dude. I used to call him Handsome Jay. That was like my joke nickname for him. All the girls liked Jordan. And, you know, we're good, but like I never had anything against him. But I think King really captures this well where you're like, man, I wish some of those girls kind of like me kind of thing, you know? Like feeling a little bit insecure. There's also some cattiness between the female characters that I thought was really done very well. All around, just a great, chilling, scary story. It's funny, this one also reminds me of Jordan in another way. We've talked about this on the channel before. There's this one story that's just burned into our memories. Jordan and I and a few other friends, we were swimming in these artificial like pond, lake things in our town. They had excavated this area and filled it with water. So there was a tree that had been left there. They didn't cut it down. And the top of the tree was just at the surface of the water. So you could swim out and like sit on this log, but it was attached to the bottom. We went out there and we were sitting there on the log for like too long. And we started to like psych ourselves out. Hey, what if something was in the water? What if something came up and grabbed you? And we started to get really terrified of like jumping back in the water to swim to shore. But we were like already knee deep, waist deep in the water, like sitting on this log. It was a really terrifying experience, and it was very much like what happens to these characters in the story, The Raft. Word processor of the gods. A man named Richard is unhappy with his family situation, and he receives a home-modified word processor as a gift from his nephew. The nephew was working on the word processor, but never quite finished it when he died in a car accident. So he gets this thing, and it's like, it's not quite what the nephew probably wanted it to be. When the man sits down to see if it works, he gets quite a shocking surprise. I enjoyed this one. It's the kind of like genie gives you wishes with unintended consequences type of story, you know? I feel like those are pretty fun, but this one didn't take it far enough. It's funny to say that about Stephen King, saying that like he didn't take something far enough, because oftentimes he goes maybe a little too far. But this one, it was like, okay, everything is kind of working out okay for this character, and then, well, I don't want to spoil the ending, but I just wish there had been a few more unintended consequences, or I wish that he had maybe used it a little bit more, a little bit longer, and just had to like stew in the results of all of that. I think overall it was just a little too short and had some missed opportunities, but it's a fun read. The Man Who Would Not Shake Hands. I freaking love this one, you guys. I love this one so much. It takes place in the same club from The Breathing Method, which again, I talked about in my last video. That's a story from different seasons. So this takes place in the same club that is like maybe sort of a dimensional portal to other places or whatever, we don't know. This one doesn't deal with the weird traveling to other dimensions or anything. Actually, the events of The Breathing Method are mentioned right at the beginning of the story, so it's very explicitly connected. I enjoyed this structure much more than The Breathing Method. I talked about in the other video. The Breathing Method, it's like this guy's telling a story about another guy telling a story. That doesn't happen in this one. I felt like this one worked a lot better. Here, the person is telling a story to the club, right? But they're being interrupted every once in a while by comments and questions from the club members, so it's very anchored in the club. It doesn't feel like the weird layered thing that happened in the Breathing Method. It feels like there's just a person telling a story, and you're one of the people listening to it. So the actual story the guy tells is about a man named Henry Brower, who played poker with 4 other club members one night in 1919. Brower is a strange type and refuses to shake hands with anyone, explaining that he's just returned from the germ-filled cesspit of Bombay and finds touching other people to be very disagreeable. They play poker for quite some time, and right at the end of the game, one of the men shakes hands with Brower. Like, he sneaks it in. He just grabs his hand. He gets extremely upset and leaves. The narrator does his best to find Brower, and in the process learns the truth about his aversion to human touch. It's just really good. I'm not going to say anything more about it. Definitely worth a read. Definitely recommend. It's really good. Beachworld. This one's another banger. Really solid story. 2 men crash land their ship on a desert planet. It's a spaceship sci-fi type story. One is transfixed by the miles and miles of endless sand dunes that surround them, referring to them as a beach with no ocean. Will his companion be able to snap him out of it? And even if he does, how long can they survive before dehydration does them in? You'll have to read it and find out. Why am I writing my notes like this? You'll have to read it and find out. Ooh. Yeah, it's a good story. I liked it. The Reaper's Image. This one's another banger. I really, really like this story a lot. It takes the sort of the ghost haunting type story, and then nice little clever twist at the end that I really enjoyed. Some sort of art historian visits an old house turned museum to look at an antique mirror. The mirror is supposed to be cursed. Some people claim that when they look in it, they see a dark smudge that resembles the figure of a man wearing a black robe. The Reaper's Image. Dun dun dun! I actually wrote dun 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 in my notes. I won't tell you what happens to the people who see the Reaper, but I will say this. It is a fun story that is well worth the 5 to 10 minutes it takes to read it. Nona. A troubled young man tells the story of how he met a girl at a truck stop diner and they went on a crime spree together. This one mentions Castle Rock. It sort of takes place partially in Castle Rock. It talks about Ace Merrill and Vern Tessio, who are from the story The Body. So it's connected to all that stuff. I really liked most of the story. It was very, like, not supernatural. And it almost felt like watching some sort of, like, daytime TV crime drama thing. You know, like, oh, these 2 or not even a drama, but, like, a real-life, you know, crime podcast or something like that. It's like 2 teenagers go on a crime spree and leave death and destruction in their wake, and here's the story or whatever. Like, it felt really cool. But then the ending has this weird supernatural thing, and it's kind of grotesque, and it just wasn't what I hoped for. It's not bad, just wasn't really what I hoped for. So I found it a little bit disappointing, but overall, really solid story. Overall, I liked it quite a bit. For Owen. This one's another poem. Again, I'm not a poetry kind of guy. It's about walking to school with his son, Owen. I don't understand poetry like this, and it's not interesting enough to make me want to understand it, is what I wrote. Yeah, he talks about, like, I think he talks about, like, seeing fruit, like, the people around them are giant fruits or something like that. I don't remember. whatever. Survivor Type. This one is a really famous story, really popular one, and I see why after reading it. A surgeon is shipwrecked on a tiny desert island with no plant or animal life to speak of. In order to survive, he resorts to drastic and unspeakable measures. This one's just like 10 for 10, amazing story. You gotta check it out. Again, it's messed up. It's Stephen King. It's a little gruesome. But it's so good. Like, you're reading it, you're like, holy crap. Would I do that in this situation? Would I be able to do that? I don't know. It's a wonderful example of how King can realistically portray, it feels very realistic, absolute desperation and a descent into madness. Uncle Otto's truck. The narrator's uncle was once a wealthy landowner, but after his business partner mysteriously dies by getting crushed under his truck, the uncle inherits that truck, but he also begins to change for the worse. The narrator tells of how his uncle's condition deteriorates over time until... ... This one mentions Castle County, Derry, Castle Rock. It seems to take place just outside of Castle Rock. Mentions Harlow. Mentions Billy Dodd, who is the father of Frank Dodd, character from Cujo. And Frank Dodd is also mentioned in The Body, and I think a couple other stories. Overall, great story. I really like these kind of ghostly, haunting type stories. This one made me think of an M.R. James type story. Morning Deliveries, Milkman number 1. A milkman named Spike makes several deliveries around town, but they aren't what you would expect. I didn't get the point of this. Like, I guess it's an interesting concept, but wouldn't a milkman doing this get caught, like, immediately? I don't know. It was just kind of weird. There's also no closure. It just kind of stops. And then I wrote here, looks like the next story is a continuation of this one, so maybe it'll come together. And the next story, Big Wheels, A Tale of the Laundry Game, Milkman number 2. Two drunk guys drive around looking for someone to inspect the car they're in because the sticker expires that night. But the car is a pile of junk and it's getting late. They finally find someone and it happens to be an old high school buddy of the car owner. The mechanic is about to close up shop, but the driver convinces him to help them out. They start reminiscing about the good old days and things get a little out of hand. This one does indeed tie into the previous story. The car owner, Rocky, is mentioned several times in the first story, and Spike, who is the milkman from the first story, shows up at the end of this story. But there are like a few confusing things about these stories. One, I just thought it was funny that like they're desperate to get their car inspected to get the sticker updated. I can't imagine these two guys who are like really low lives and they're drunk. Like, why are they so concerned with getting it inspected that night? They can't wait till the morning. They can't wait till the weekend. Like, come on. The first story kind of made it seem like Spike and Rocky were friends, but in the second story, it says that Spike cuckolded Rocky, and then when Spike shows up, Rocky's like really afraid that Spike is there. And he says something about like how Spike kills people. And so like he knew this previously, so this is like a thing Spike does. Like, I don't know, it just didn't work together. A couple people online said that these stories are part of a larger novel that King abandoned. So that would maybe make sense. Like this, it felt like this was starting something that was never finished, you know? Other people said that like, maybe these are just absurdist stories that are not really meant to make sense. Either way, I just didn't really like them all that much because, again, they're confusing, they don't make sense, so whatever. Gramma. This is a good one. A young boy is left at home alone with his grandma, who he's more than a little afraid of. She's quite old, senile, and bedridden, but is she as harmless as everyone else seems to think? This one, the kid's brother, his name's Buddy. He's at the CGM hospital, the Cumberland General Medical? I don't know. In Lewiston, Maine. So that connects it to like Salem's Lot. Henrietta Dodd is mentioned. She actually kind of makes an appearance. She's the mother of Frank Dodd and the husband of Billy Dodd that was mentioned in the other story earlier. Takes place in Castle Rock. Mentions Joe Camber from Cujo. It mentions Gates Falls, which is the town that the graveyard shift takes place in. The Body also mentions Gates Falls, so that ties those together. Really, I like this story quite a bit. It is a bit slow. It feels a little bit slow. It feels like Stephen King read the Lovecraft story, The Thing on the Doorstep, and then just tried to like do his own thing with it. And it works, but I do like Lovecraft's better. I gotta give the trophy to Lovecraft. The Thing on the Doorstep is probably the best Lovecraft story I've ever read. The Ballad of the Flexible Bullet. At a backyard dinner party, it's drinks after dinner, a successful editor is telling the story of an author he knew who slowly descended into madness. And as some claim, madness may be contagious. So I really like this one. I mentioned earlier, Stephen King is really good at describing that descent into madness. That part of the story was really good. But ultimately, it's just like really too long. And I don't get why King keeps doing this thing where he's telling a story about a character who's telling another story. Like, just tell the story. I don't know, you know? So like half of the story was really good and it is worth a read. But there's just a lot of fluff, and it's pretty long. If it were a bit shorter, it would be truly excellent. The parts focusing on the author's sanity or lack thereof were really, really solid. The Reach. Final story here. In all her 95 years of life, Stella has never left Goat Island. People, especially her great-grandkids, don't understand why she's never left the island, and she has a hard time explaining that she never really wanted to. Now that she's quite old, Stella has started seeing things. Can't really say more than that. I didn't really enjoy the story. It was hard to keep up. This story is like 18 pages long, and there are like 30 or more named characters. So I was just like confused. Like, do I need to know this part? Like, what? What? After I got my bearings and understood what was going on, I thought it was kind of a sweet story. It's sort of cutesy in a way, but I don't know. I just didn't really enjoy the way it was told. It skews more literary, which is, I think, why it won the World Fantasy Award. But I'm more of a fan, usually, of more direct prose. Like, this one was very poetical and kind of flowery. And I was just like, okay, tell me what's going on, like, because I'm not getting it. But hey, again, this won a big award, so what do I know? You know, check it out. It's probably pretty good. I did find it kind of funny how, like, the first few stories and the last few stories I felt were the weakest ones, but the chunk in the middle were mostly, like, really, really, really good stories. So overall, yes, definitely recommend Skeleton Crew. A lot of these Stephen King books, after I read them, I donate them or try to sell them online or whatever. This one I'm going to keep. That's like my mark of approval, my seal, that this is a good book, because I'm actually going to keep it in my collection. I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, if you're interested in talking about Stephen King with me, feel free to hit me up in the comments, and I will see you next time.